The hills swallowed sound. That was the first thing I noticed. Our engines roared as we wound up the narrow dirt road, but every echo seemed eaten by the trees. No birds, no wind, nothing but the crunch of tires on gravel. Appalachia had a way of making a man feel unwelcome, like the land itself wanted you gone. We were a 6-vehicle convoy, moving equipment to a remote training site. Officially, that was the mission. Unofficially, nobody really knew why we were here. The orders had been vague, just coordinates and a timeline. No maps marked the location we were driving toward. That alone made some of the guys restless. Corporal Hayes muttered from the passenger seat beside me. "Feels wrong out here, like we're hauling into nowhere." I kept my hands tight on the wheel, eyes on the road ahead. Orders are orders. We'll drop the crates, turn around, and be back before sundown. That was the plan. Simple. Routine. But routines fall apart fast in these hills. As we climbed higher, fog bled from the tree line, rolling across the road. Not the thin kind you see at dawn, but heavy, damp, and strangely yellow in the headlights. The convoy slowed. Radios hissed static. Sergeant Miller's voice broke through. "Keep formation." No one drifts. Eyes open. The fog thickened until even the taillights of the truck ahead blurred into smudges of red. Every mile deeper felt like a mile lost. GPS units flickered, then froze. Compasses spun without settling. Hayes swore under his breath. I wanted to say something steady, something that would ease him, but I felt it too. A weight pressing from the woods, as if the trees leaned closer every time we blinked. We stopped to check coordinates. The air outside was colder than it should have been. My breath fogged instantly. The ground was soft, wet with moss. The forest looked ancient, untouched. Branches nodded overhead, strangling out any sense of direction. Private Lewis from the 3rd truck stepped into the tree line to relieve himself. He laughed as he disappeared behind a trunk, his voice sharp in the silence. Then the laugh cut short. "Just gone." "Lewis!" Miller barked. We spread out, rifles raised, flashlights cutting through fog. No sound. No footprints beyond where his boots had pressed mud. He had stepped into the trees, and the trees had swallowed him. "Back in the trucks," Miller ordered. His tone was clipped, forced calm. "We're moving." We left a man behind that night. It wasn't cowardice, it was fear. The kind of fear that grips everyone at once and tells you the same truth. If you stay, you vanish too. The convoy pressed on. The fog grew brighter, though no light source was visible. The forest pressed tighter. Even the engine sounded strangled. My hands ached from gripping the wheel. Hayes whispered like he was afraid of being overheard. "Something's walking with us." I wanted to shut him down, but I had already caught glimpses in the mirror. Shapes moving parallel to the convoy, too tall to be men, their outlines bending with the fog. Every time I turned my head, nothing was there. But in the corner of my vision, they marched, silent, matching our pace. The radio crackled with Miller's voice again, but this time his words twisted, breaking apart. Half syllables, distant echoes, then silence. Static filled the cabin. Hayes slammed the dial, cursing, but nothing cleared. The lead truck slowed, then stopped. We all stopped. Ahead, the road was gone. Where gravel should have stretched forward, there was only forest. The headlights shone on trees, thick and endless. It was as if the road had never existed. No one spoke. Engines idled. I felt my chest tighten, my mind clawing for explanation. The maps were clear. This road led somewhere. But now it led nowhere. Hayes finally broke the silence. "We shouldn't be here." He was right. We all knew it. And yet the deeper truth was worse. We weren't sure where here even was anymore. That was when the sound returned. Not birds, not wind, not even animals. A deep, resonant hum rolled from the forest, vibrating the ground, rattling the glass of the windshield. It wasn't natural. It wasn't mechanical either. It was like the earth itself was groaning. The convoy lights flickered one by one, leaving us in near darkness. The hum rose louder, and from between the trees, something began to move. I didn't see its face that night, only the outline. Broad, wrong, and reaching. The convoy would never be the same after what we saw in Appalachia. And that was only the beginning. I will tell it straight. We were not a special operations team. We were a regular transport element with a few extra clearances and a habit of getting called when paperwork did not match reality. Our convoy had 6 vehicles, 3 cargo trucks, 2 Humvees, and 1 boxy communications van that looked like a mobile shed. I drove the second truck. Corporal Hayes rode shotgun. Sergeant Miller led from the first Humvee. The comms van was crewed by 2 techs who preferred the glow of screens to the open air. They kept to themselves and never took off their headsets. Our route had been red-lined through hills that most maps showed in pale green, with little detail. A supply clerk handed us the mission packet and told us the drop was for a training range that had been decommissioned. That was the word he used, decommissioned. Still, we had coordinates and a signature. The crates were sealed and stamped with codes that looked old. Not dirty or damaged, just old, as if they had been sitting in storage for years and someone had finally remembered them. On the morning we rolled, the weather was clear. By the time we hit the secondary roads, the sky had the flat color that warns you about a change. The fog found us after noon. The radios worked until they did not. The GPS units gave us long, empty screens, then a frozen dot that never moved. We did not turn around. Turning around requires a reason you can justify later. We had none that would look good in a report. The area we entered had a name once. The old locals called it Kettle Ridge. I learned that later from a county map in a ranger station after this was all over. The ridge was marked with symbols for abandoned mines and unmaintained roads. There were notes about a settlement that had failed, a small company town built around a mine that produced more accidents than coal. 3 winters of frostbite and short harvests ended it. After that, the ridge became a place people crossed quickly if they could. You can feel when ground has a history it would rather keep. Those trees had been there before us. They would be there after us. The fog clung to them, and the trunks looked wet even when the leaves were dry. Our engines sounded thin as if the air itself swallowed power. Every time I checked my mirrors, I saw movement between trunks. It never resolved into clear shapes. Just the sense of tall figures pacing the convoy and watching without blinking. Before Lewis vanished into the trees, the day had felt tense but manageable. After he stepped off the road and did not return, a line had been crossed. We all knew the rule. Stay in sight, stay on the road, stay within voice. He did none of those things and the forest accepted its trade. We got back into the vehicles and pushed on because the only other choice was to admit we had lost a man to nothing. If we said it out loud, I think the hill would have taken more. We did not talk about Lewis. We talked about mileage, fuel, and time to the drop. We talked about how long it would take to reverse the column if we had to. Hayes kept our truck aligned on the vague glow of the taillights ahead and watched the tree line through the gap in the windshield. Every so often, he would lean forward as if he had heard a voice. When I asked, he shook his head and said it was nothing. His eyes told me he did not believe that. Miller called a halt when the road ended at an impossible wall of trees. The surface simply pinched shut. Gravel disappeared under roots, and saplings stood where tire tracks should have run. He walked the line and put his hand on hoods to feel heat and remind us he was real. He was a steady leader. He did not confuse calm with softness. He gave orders in short phrases. Park staggered, lights low, weapons closed but slung. No one wanders. The comms van tried to raise higher channels and got a chorus of static. We formed a loose circle with vehicles quartered to cover both directions. The fog had a color to it now, a dim yellow tint that made the trees look sick. I kept thinking about sulfur, even though there was no smell of match heads or rotten eggs. The air smelled like wet iron and closed houses. Breathing felt like walking into a church after a storm and finding the candles still lit. We cracked one crate to check for damage. Miller logged the seal number and used a crowbar. The metal gave with a dull pop. Inside were wrapped cylinders stacked in foam. The protective film peeled like onion skin. Each cylinder had a serial etched near the base. The tech from the comms van said nothing at first. He just looked at the numbers as if they were years. Then he nodded once and told Miller the payload was archival. He used that word, archival. He said the cylinders housed analog recording devices that had been sealed during a long shuttered project. He would not say what had been recorded. He did say the destination stamped on the manifest was a facility that did not appear on the current installation list. We repacked the crate. No one mentioned why active units would move antique recorders to a training range that supposedly no longer existed. No one asked why the identifiers on the cylinders matched the date format used by an agency that favors quiet buildings with no windows. We went back to the simple plan: hold security, wait for the fog to lift, find the road again, deliver the load. While we waited, Hayes drifted toward a tree and touched the bark with 3 fingers. He pulled his hand back sharply, as if the trunk had shocked him. He stared at his fingertips like he expected to see sap. The skin was dry. He did not explain. He did not need to. The tree had felt wrong. That was enough. Night started early. There was no sunset in that hollow, only a slow dimming until the fog carried light of its own. We ate cold rations and drank water that tasted of plastic. The forest pressed close. It was not a trick of distance. The nearest trees were closer after an hour than they had been when we parked. We used a laser rangefinder on a thick trunk to test our eyes. The reading dropped by a meter over the course of the watch. We argued about calibration until the laser glitched and the display filled with zeros. Miller split the night into watches. I took the second. The first hour passed with little to report. The hum returned in the second hour. It rolled in from the ridge like a distant engine buried in mud. It made the window glass tremble. It made the water in canteen cups ripple in tiny circles. The sound carried no rhythm. It rose and fell in waves that made conversation feel like speaking underwater. The techs in the van stood in their doorway and held their headsets in their hands as if listening through fingers. We saw lights then, not headlights, not signals. Small white sparks drifting between the trunks at chest height. Some moved in slow arcs. Some hovered as if caught by an invisible thread and then fell to the ground without a splash or a burn. When a spark died, it left a faint outline of roots in the soil. It looked like an exposure in an old photograph, a white print of a map no one living had memorized. Hayes whispered that we had stumbled into a range test that had never ended. He said it like a joke. No one laughed. Miller ordered quiet and told us to fix our focus. We were soldiers on a routine. We were not children at a ghost story. We repeated that to ourselves until the next thing broke the loop. Voices moved through the trees. They were not speaking to us. They were speaking to each other in firm tones, the way men talk when they have practiced in order and do not want to improvise. The words were English, but the cadence was older. A roll call, a report of head count, a correction, another count. Then the same names again. The first time through, it sounded like a patrol checking a list. The second time through, it sounded like the list itself refused to change. No matter how many names were said, we called out. The voices did not answer. They passed by at a careful pace and faded. I felt a stupid rush of relief until I realized the voices were not moving on. They were circling us. Each pass came a few feet closer. The sound cut off when the speakers should have stepped into the clearing. It resumed once they should have passed the nearest bumper. One of the techs put the headset back on and turned a dial as if he could record the air without the van. He looked less pale when he was pretending to work. Hayes crouched beside the crate with the cylinders. He touched the lid and asked me what it meant when machines returned to the place they were built. I told him we were not going to guess. He nodded and did not move his hand. The lid felt warm to him. I could see the faint tremble of his palm, even though the night was cold. The fog changed again near dawn. The yellow washed out. A silver cast settled over the clearing. The trees straightened. The hum fell to a low vibration that sat in the bones. I walked the edge of our vehicles and checked straps and tires, and the way small things sat where we had left them. I had a list. I used it to keep my mind from straying. When I finished the list, I made another one that included items that had not changed during the night. 4 cones we never placed stood 20 feet from the rear bumper of the last truck. They were faded but stable. I know equipment. Those cones were government issue from a stock set that had not been in use for a long time. The white reflective bands were scuffed and scored in a pattern that looked like fingernails. A quiet fell on us that was different from the earlier silence. This quiet felt like a question. We were being asked to move, not by a person, by the place. Miller must have felt it too. He raised his hand to signal ignition. We turned keys in near unison. One engine coughed and died. He moved his hand again. We tried once more. The engines caught with thin voices and then found their rhythm. Headlights threw weak tunnels through the silver haze. Where the wall of trees had been, a gap had opened that looked like road. It was narrower than the track we had arrived on. Gravel glinted under the film of fog. The gap did not show in mirrors. In the mirrors, the wall still stood. Straight ahead, the way was open. We were a convoy built to obey, follow, and lead. We did both. The vehicles rolled into line and pointed their noses at the gap. I looked at the crate with the etched cylinders and thought of the word archival. I thought of the way the voices had circled without entering. I thought of the cones that none of us had set down. The fog drew back as if exhaling. Hayes closed his door and set his boot on the mat like a man stepping into a cold river. We moved as one and entered the cut through the trees, and that was when the ridge began to tell us what we had really been sent here to deliver. The gap in the trees was too precise, straight edges, gravel laid clean as if by hand. Convoy tracks are messy things, torn earth and scattered stone, but this path looked new. It didn't belong in country this forgotten. We drove slow. Miller kept us tight, Humvee up front, trucks in column, comms van dragging last. Hayes leaned forward on the dash, staring through fog. He spoke without looking at me. This wasn't here last night. He was right. We had stared at that wall of trunks until dawn, and there had been no gap. Now the forest had decided to offer one. The air grew colder as we advanced. Frost rimed the mirrors. Our breath fogged inside the cabs. Radios stayed dead, just low static that rose and fell like breathing. My tires crunched gravel, but the sound was muted, swallowed before it carried. The road bent downhill, deeper into the ridge. The fog thinned in places, opening on clearings filled with remnants of structures. Cabins slumped under moss. Rusted fences leaned into weeds. Signs lay face down in dirt. Every building looked abandoned at least 50 years, but there was no rot of collapse. They looked preserved, as if the people had left yesterday, but never came back. We passed a boarded schoolhouse with windows nailed shut from the inside. Its bell tower still stood, bell intact. The sight twisted my gut. Brass bells don't last decades in rain without corroding. Hayes tapped the glass. Place looks frozen, like it skipped aging. I nodded but didn't answer. He was saying what I was already thinking. The lead Humvee braked, brake lights glowing through the haze. Miller stepped out, signaled us to dismount. We formed a loose perimeter around the column. The clearing ahead held a long building, brick with steel shutters, tall enough to be official. The roof bore an old military star, faint but visible under lichen. "Depot," Miller said, low voice steady, "matches our drop coordinates." It didn't match any map, but it matched our orders. That was enough. The comms techs checked the manifest and confirmed the serials. They wanted the cylinders carried inside, logged, signed. Standard procedure, spoken like a script. Miller hesitated, then nodded. We broke the seals on the trucks and began unloading. The fog pressed at our backs as if watching. Inside the depot, the air was dry and cold. Dust lay thick but not disturbed. Lights flickered alive as the techs touched a panel. Power still ran in veins we couldn't trace. The wall smelled of oil and rust, but beneath it was something sharper, like formaldehyde. We set the crates in rows on marked pallets. Yellow paint peeled on the floor, stenciled with numbers that matched the manifest. Every detail felt rehearsed, like we were walking into someone else's memory. Hayes whispered as we carried another load. "You noticed the pallets? Same pattern as the voices last night. Same sequence." I hadn't, but when I looked, the numbers ran like the roll call. Over and over. The techs opened one cylinder, ignoring Miller's glare. Inside was a reel of magnetic tape, sealed under glass. The label carried a date, 1949, and a string of coordinates. Appalachia, same ridge. Hayes swore and stepped back. "Why bring us here to return what was already recorded?" he asked. The tech snapped the case shut, face pale. He muttered that the tapes were government property, not our concern. He spoke quick, clipped, like a man repeating what he'd been trained to say. We stacked the last crate. Miller called a halt. He wanted the convoy fueled. Men rotated for rest, then departure as soon as daylight strengthened. He didn't say it, but he didn't want to linger in that depot, None of us did. The hum returned, faint at first, then rising through the floor. The reels inside the cylinders vibrated. The sound seemed to come from below. Private Collins, youngest in the squad, crouched and pressed an ear to the floor. He jerked back like burned, his eyes wide. "Voices," he said. "They're under us." We all froze. No one laughed. The techs ordered the crates sealed, chains locked. Their voices shook. Hayes whispered in my ear, "We brought something home. It remembers this place." The hum climbed until dust rained from rafters. The depot lights pulsed in rhythm. Then the reels began to spin inside the sealed cylinders. Spinning fast, tape clicking against glass, though no one had touched them. Miller barked for us to move. We hauled back to trucks, slammed doors, engines roaring. The fog outside had grown thicker, white and blinding. The depot behind us glowed faintly as if lit from underground. The road back was not the road we had driven down. Turns bent sharper. Clearings shrank to narrow gullies. Buildings we hadn't seen before stood along the track. A church with a collapsed steeple. A row of houses with windows boarded from the inside. In one, candlelight flickered. Hayes leaned close. "They're not ruins. They're waiting." My knuckles whitened on the wheel. I kept the truck locked on Miller's tail. Every instinct screamed not to stop, not even to glance too long at the sides. Collins began muttering in the back. His voice rose, repeating the same names we had heard in the forest. His roll call matched the pallets, matched the cylinders. We tried to shake him, but he didn't stop. His eyes stared forward, unblinking. The comms van called through bursts of static. One phrase clear, "Do not play them." Then the line died. The road narrowed into a tunnel of trees. The hum became a roar, shaking mirrors, vibrating steel. The fog inside the cab thickened, crawling along the floorboards. I could see my boots blur. Hayes swatted at the mist with his hand like it was alive. Then headlights lit a figure in the road. Tall, gaunt, uniformed. Helmet tilted low, mud-crusted boots. His skin gray like ash. He raised his hand, palm open. The convoy braked hard. Tires screeched. My chest slammed against the wheel. The figure stepped between beams of light, never casting a shadow. His lips moved, silent, but Collins shouted the words from the back. "Report complete. All accounted." The figure lowered his hand. Behind him, more forms appeared. Rows of soldiers in faded gear, rifles slung, helmets cracked, eyes hollow but fixed on us. They filled the road in silence. Miller cursed and ordered forward. Engines revved. The figures did not move. For a moment I thought we would crash through them, but the lead Humvee stopped inches from the first. The figure's head tilted, studying us. Hayes gripped my arm. "They're guarding it!" The tapes. This was never about delivery. It's about return. The figures shifted, parting the line. They opened the road deeper into the ridge, not back out. The message was clear. "Continue." Miller's voice broke over the radio, harsh, stripped of choice. "We follow. Stay tight. No stragglers." The convoy rolled forward, deeper into ground that felt less and less like earth and more like memory. The soldiers marched with us, silent, step for step. Hayes whispered what we all feared. "We're not driving into the hills anymore. We're driving into theirs." And the road ahead was waiting. The convoy rolled deeper, headlights carving tunnels through a fog that no longer looked like weather. It was too dense, too purposeful. It flowed around the trucks in sheets, always reforming ahead of us. My hands felt welded to the wheel, every finger stiff. Hayes sat rigid, his eyes locked on the marching figures outside. Uniform cuts from different decades mixed on the same line. Some were mid-century, with helmets strapped by leather chin bands, rifles long obsolete. The more I studied them, the more I noticed the impossible details. Rusted insignia that no cloth could still carry. Fragments of equipment eaten by time, but bodies moving steady as if flesh still clung to bone. Their eyes were wrong, hollow, lightless, but fixed. The convoy matched their pace. The engines should have drowned all sound, but I swear I heard their boots hit gravel in unison, step by step. Every beat pressed into the road, not echoing, but sinking. Hayes broke the silence first. "They're not ghosts. Ghosts don't keep formation. I wanted to tell him to shut it, but my throat was dry. He was right. Whatever they weren't drifting memories. They were disciplined. They had a mission. The road opened into a basin ringed by trees. The fog glowed faintly, as if lit from the soil itself. At the center of the clearing stood a bunker. Low, square, built of poured concrete and stone. Its steel door bore the same faded star we had seen on the depot. Vines crept across the surface, but no rust marked the hinges. The air hummed louder here, vibrating through my teeth. The marching figures stopped short of the bunker. They turned as one, rifles slung, and faced us. A silent wall of watchers. The lead figure raised his arm again, pointing at the door. Miller braked the Humvee. Engines idled, growling low. No one moved. Then Collins spoke. His voice was flat, mechanical. Site echo, Ridge control, status confirmed, unit return complete. We all snapped our heads toward him. His eyes stared forward, pupils blown wide. He hadn't moved his lips, but the words came through him. Hayes cursed and grabbed his shoulder, shaking him hard. Collins blinked once, then repeated the same words, tone identical. It wasn't his voice anymore. Miller swore under his breath, then climbed out. He signaled 2 men to cover him as he approached the bunker door. His boots crunched gravel, loud in the silence. The steel surface loomed larger with every step until he raised a hand to touch it. The door opened on its own. No grind of hinges, no mechanical whine, just a smooth swing inward, revealing a black corridor lined with old lights that flickered to life one by one. The glow stretched into the earth, vanishing down a sloping tunnel. The hum grew sharper, like a signal pulling us forward. Miller looked back. His face was pale, but his jaw set. We finished the delivery. Crates inside, quick. Then we leave. Orders were orders, even when they came from a place deeper than chain of command. We unloaded most of it, but 2 sealed crates stayed strapped on the rear trucks for the next run. Each crate felt heavier than before, though the load hadn't changed. Hayes muttered that the hill wanted its due. His voice cracked, but he kept moving. Inside the tunnel, the air was cold and metallic, as if we had stepped into the belly of something alive. The corridor led us into a chamber lined with steel racks. Dust covered everything, but the racks were labeled with tags, dates, coordinates, all Appalachia. Some labels older than the war our grandfathers had fought, some newer, bleeding into years we were born. We set the crates down where the tags matched. Each thud echoed too long, bouncing off the walls as if the room were larger than it looked. The reels inside the cylinders began to spin again, faster this time. A low hiss filled the chamber, like tape running over heads. Collins stepped forward, drawn like a moth. His hands hovered over one crate, trembling. His voice dropped into a whisper that wasn't his own. They were receipts, not recordings. The word chilled me worse than the air. Receipts, proof of transaction. Something had been traded here long ago, and we were delivering the ledger back. The lights dimmed, then flared. The reels whirled so fast they blurred. Sound bled from the cases, not voices we knew. Chanting, orders shouted in clipped syllables, screams cut short, gunfire. The noise of entire battles compressed into a single stream. Hayes clapped his hands over his ears, shouting, "They're playing the dead." We tried to drag Collins back, but his body convulsed. His eyes rolled white. The words poured out of him now, whole sentences in a language none of us spoke. It sounded old, guttural, but his lips kept pace with perfect precision. The bunker vibrated, dust raining from seams in the concrete. The racks rattled. Some of the tags tore free, fluttering like paper in a gale. Miller barked for us to get the hell out. We grabbed what men we could and stumbled back toward the corridor. The crates stayed. They were never ours to move. The soldiers outside hadn't shifted. They stood at parade rest, rifles slung, eyes on us, watching, waiting. Miller shoved Collins into the back of the Humvee. His body shook like a wire in the wind. The rest of us piled in. Engines roared. Headlights cut the fog. The figures parted again, opening the road. But this time, it didn't lead back toward the ridge we knew. It sloped deeper, cutting into terrain that hadn't been there before. Hayes slammed his fist on the dash. "They're not letting us go. They're pulling us further." He was right. The convoy crawled forward, not because we chose, but because the road only pointed one way. The trees thinned. The fog brightened until it looked like daylight, but the sky above was still pitch black. We drove past more ruins, but these were stranger. Rows of barracks that seemed half-buried, roofs sunk into earth. Watchtowers with no ladders, just skeletal frames. A parade ground etched with lines too straight to be weathered, glowing faint under the fog. Miller's voice came over the radio tight. "Eyes front, stay steady, we don't stop." But the convoy was slowing, not from hesitation but from the trucks themselves. The engines strained, gauges spiking, as if something resisted forward motion. The air thickened like mud. Steering grew heavy in my hands. Collins screamed. His voice cut like static through the cab. He shouted numbers, long sequences, coordinates, dates. Some matched the tags I'd seen, others stretched into years that hadn't happened yet. His throat tore raw, but he didn't stop. The sound wasn't his anymore. It was the tapes speaking through him. Hayes slammed the butt of his rifle against the floor. "Kill the reels! Smash them!" But the reels weren't in our trucks anymore. They were sealed inside the bunker behind us. Still, the sound bled through miles of rock, riding on the hum. Then we saw it. The road ended at a pit, a vast hollow carved into the ridge. Its edges were lined with stone pillars, each carved with the star emblem, stacked with more tags fluttering like prayer slips. The pit's center glowed with a dim, molten light. Shapes moved inside, slow and massive, too deep to make sense of. The marching soldiers formed lines along the edge, rifles held upright. Their hollow eyes never wavered. The lead figure stepped forward, turned toward us, and raised his hand again. Not stopping us this time. Beckoning, Hayes whispered, voice cracking. "They want us to join the roll call." The convoy idled at the brink. Engines shook. The air reeked of iron and something sweet, cloying, like rot masked by flowers. The hum peaked, rattling steel, pressing into bone. Collins screamed until blood ran from his nose. His final words before collapsing were clear, cutting through the roar. "Report incomplete." The pit flared brighter. The soldiers stamped their boots in unison. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound shook the ground. Miller's voice broke through, raw with fear. "Reverse, now!" But when I glanced in the mirror, the road behind us was gone. Only fog, only darkness. We had reached the heart of the ridge, and the ridge wasn't going to let us leave. The pit glowed like a wound in the earth. Red and orange light seeped from deep below, reflecting against fog that swirled overhead like smoke caught in a jar. Our engines idled at the edge, coughing weak, metallic sounds, as if they too wanted no part of what waited inside. The soldiers lined around the rim stood silent, rifles angled across their chests. Not one shifted or blinked. Their hollow eyes seemed fixed not on us, but on the pit itself, as if they were guarding it or maybe guarding us from it. Collins lay in the back of the Humvee, face pale, blood drying under his nose. His chest rose shallow, each breath a ragged hitch. Hayes leaned forward on the dash, knuckles white, whispering in rhythm with the hum that rolled out of the pit. Miller broke the silence over the net, his voice a rasp. "This isn't ours. We're leaving." But when he threw the Humvee in reverse, the rear cameras showed nothing but fog. The road had dissolved. Tires spun, gravel spitting, but the truck barely shifted. We were boxed in. The only direction left was forward. The pit pulsed, brighter with every passing second. Heat rose, carrying the stink of iron and wet stone. I swear I saw shapes moving within the light, massive silhouettes shifting below the surface. Not men, not machines. Things without edges. Things that pressed against the glow, like shadows trying to escape their source. The lead figure among the soldiers stepped closer. His uniform looked older up close. Leather straps cracked, boots sunk deep in gravel. He lifted one hand, palm open. Then he turned it slowly until his finger pointed toward the pit. Hayes muttered, almost to himself. "They're waiting for us to finish the delivery." Not the crates. Us. Miller snapped back, anger born of fear. "Shut it! Engines full! On my mark!" But even he knew the truth. We had carried something into this place that did not stop at the depot. The ridge had taken Lewis. It had used Collins. It had steered us here. We were the last part of the shipment. The glow surged and the hum became a roar, shaking our teeth. The reels in the depot, miles back sealed away, still spun. We could feel their rhythm through the ground. It was the same rhythm that thudded in the soldiers' boots. Collins stirred. His lips parted, voice low but steady. Unit incomplete, muster required. Then his eyes snapped open. They glowed faint red, catching the light from the pit. That was when the first of the soldiers stepped off the rim. He walked into the pit without hesitation, boots striking stone, then vanishing into the glow. One after another followed. They didn't fall, didn't stumble. They marched straight down into the molten light as if onto solid ground. Their silhouettes grew smaller until the glow swallowed them whole. The lead figure remained at the edge, arms still raised. Waiting. Hayes' voice cracked. "They're calling us in." The comms van lit up with static, speakers blasting fragments of words. Not radio chatter, not ours. Old transmissions, decades dead. Orders shouted in World War tones. Casualty reports, weather updates, lost signals. All at once layered into a storm of voices. The van doors rattled from the force. One of the techs inside screamed, holding his headset as blood streamed from his ears. Miller gave the order. "We don't go in." We fight our way out. He spun the Humvee, forcing it into the fog. The truck jolted, shook, then slammed to a halt as if it had hit a wall. The engine revved, but tires screamed uselessly. The fog thickened, pressing against the windows like hands. Shapes leaned out of it, faces half-formed, mouths opening in silent cries. The road was sealed. Then the ground shook. The pit widened, edges crumbling into gravel that tumbled down in cascades of sparks. The glow surged upward, blinding. From its center, a column of fireless light rose, twisting. Inside it, shadows writhed, limbs too long, heads too misshapen. They pressed outward as if clawing to escape. The hum reached a pitch that rattled our ribs. Collins sat up, voice booming in cadence with the sound. "Roll call complete. Entry authorized." Miller shouted for weapons free. Rifles raised, safeties clicked off. We fired into the pit. Bullets sparked against unseen surfaces, vanishing into the glow. No effect. The soldiers who had already stepped inside did not falter. They marched deeper, vanishing into light. The lead figure turned toward us, lowering his arm. For the first time, his mouth moved and sound reached us. A single word, flat and final. "Enter." Our headlights flickered, then died. Engines choked into silence. The convoy was dead in the water. Panic surged through the ranks. Hayes fumbled at his rifle, swearing. The techs screamed for us to smash the crates, to destroy the reels, to sever whatever link bound us to this place. But the reels weren't here. They were spinning miles behind us, and the ridge was their echo chamber. The ground split. Cracks spidered out from the pit, glowing veins crawling toward the convoy. Heat rose, choking. One fissure split beneath my truck, and I felt the frame shudder. Hayes grabbed my arm. "We're already written down. That's why they let us come this far. We're names on their list now." And I believed him. Every boot we'd heard in the woods, every voice repeating the roll call, had been counting us too. Miller barked the last order I ever heard him give. "Dismount! Form line! We don't die on our knees." We spilled from the trucks, rifles braced, forming a shaky perimeter against soldiers who didn't move. They just watched, eyes empty, rifles silent. The only sound was the pit's roar. The light surged higher, a tower piercing the fog, and from its base something began to rise. It was not a man, not a machine. Its shape shifted with every glance, sometimes a column of limbs, sometimes a lattice of bone and wire. Its surface shimmered like metal soaked in blood, and within it, faces pressed outward, screaming silently, their mouths wide, their eyes desperate. The soldiers who had entered the pit turned as one. Their rifles snapped up, aimed not at us but at the rising shape. They fired in volleys, but the rounds vanished into its mass. The sound of their shots blended into the roar until it all became one endless, deafening note. Collins screamed louder than them all. His voice broke, but the words poured through him. Coordinates, dates, unit numbers. Each shouted line cracked something in the ground, forcing more fissures open. The pit wanted him, and it was using him to call itself whole. Hayes and I dragged him back, but his body fought with a strength not his own. His eyes glowed like coals, his mouth foamed, and still he screamed the list. The pit's light engulfed the soldiers completely now. Their silhouettes melted into the glow. One by one, they collapsed into nothing but sparks. Their formation dissolved, but their discipline never faltered. They vanished standing, rifles firm. The lead figure was last. He looked at us, raised his hand once more. Then he stepped into the light, gone. The thing rising from the pit lifted higher, towering over the rim. Its scream was the hum magnified, splitting air, making blood leak from ears and noses. The ground shook until trucks toppled. The comms van collapsed on its side. Crates burst open, reels spilling, spinning freely across the ground. Tape unspooled, snaking toward the pit like veins drawn home. Hayes bellowed in my ear, "Cut it! Cut the tape!" We slashed with knives, boots grinding reels underfoot, but every piece we cut seemed to writhe and reconnect, pulling itself toward the glow. The pit wanted its receipts back, every second of death it had recorded. Miller fired until his rifle clicked empty, then drew his sidearm and shot into the reels, into the light, into anything that moved. His voice tore into a roar. "We're not part of your muster." The light surged in answer, and then for a heartbeat, everything went silent. Colin's body went limp. The reels stopped spinning. The glow froze, pulsing once like a heartbeat. Then the fog rushed inward, wrapping around us, swallowing trucks, men, everything. I don't remember falling. I only remember waking later, somewhere else entirely. But in that moment at the pit's edge, I knew the ridge had claimed us. And what we saw climbing from that light was not meant for this world. When I woke, the first thing I noticed was the silence. No hum, no roar, no gunfire. Just a hollow stillness that pressed into my ears until I thought I'd gone deaf. I opened my eyes to gray light. Dawn, or something pretending to be dawn, filtered through a ceiling of fog. I lay on the ground beside my truck. It was upright again, clean, as if it had never tipped. The windshield had no cracks. The tires looked untouched. I sat up slow, every muscle aching, and checked my rifle. Full magazine, safety on, like it hadn't been fired. Hayes crouched a few feet away, head in his hands. His face was pale, eyes bloodshot. When he looked up at me, his expression told me everything. He'd seen the same thing I had. He hadn't dreamed it. The clearing was empty, no pit, no glowing fissures, no soldiers. Just damp grass, a few mossy stumps, and the faint outline of an old road leading back through the trees. It looked like any forgotten Appalachian hollow, ordinary, harmless, but it wasn't. I called for Miller, for Collins, for anyone. My voice carried, but no one answered. The convoy was gone. All 6 vehicles but mine had vanished, like they'd never rolled out here at all. Hayes stood, trembling, rifle loose in his hands. "They're not coming back," he whispered. "They marched in. They belong to it now." I wanted to argue, but the emptiness around us said he was right. We walked the clearing edge. No tracks, no shell casings, no sign of our fight. Even the crates were gone. The only mark left was a faint burn in the grass, circular, where the pit had opened. The earth there was warm to the touch, pulsing faint like a slow heartbeat. I pulled my hand away quick. Hayes said nothing. His silence scared me more than his words. We followed the road out. The fog thinned with every step, and the trees grew more familiar. Birds called again. A stream gurgled. The forest breathed like it had been holding its lungs tight all night. When we finally broke out onto blacktop, the sun was just climbing. An old highway marker leaned in weeds, numbers faint but legible. We were less than 10 miles from where we'd started. 10 miles, though we'd driven for hours into terrain that couldn't exist. We flagged down a ranger truck by noon. The man behind the wheel looked confused to see us in uniform with no convoy. He said no one used those ridge roads anymore. Landslides had closed them years ago. Bridges had collapsed. He offered water and a radio. I asked him about Kettle Ridge, about the depot. He frowned, said there'd been a mining town up there, abandoned after accidents. He'd never heard of a depot. He'd never seen a bunker. We rode back to base in silence. When the report was written, Miller and the others were listed as missing in action. No engagement, no enemy contact. The official word was vehicle accident in dense fog. Bodies unrecovered, supplies lost. Hayes and I signed our names to that lie because telling the truth wasn't an option. Who would believe it? That the Ridge had swallowed an entire convoy, that we'd carried crates of voices into a place that should not exist, that the dead had marched beside us until we stood at the mouth of something that burned without fire. The file was stamped closed, no questions asked, but the story didn't end there. That night I dreamed of the pit, the glow, the faces pressing against the light, and the roll call repeated in endless rhythm. My name was on it, Hayes's too. I woke drenched in sweat, heart hammering. I told myself it was shock, trauma. The next night, Hayes knocked on my door, pale and shaking. He'd dreamed the same thing, the same words, the same cadence, the same list of names. He swore he could hear Colin's voice leading the call, calm and steady. We didn't sleep much after that. Weeks passed. The Army moved us to another unit. Different missions, different roads. We drove convoys through quiet valleys and open plains. But the Ridge was always with us. Every patch of fog looked wrong, every silence too heavy. One morning I found Hayes staring at his reflection in the mess hall window. He turned to me and asked, "If they call again, what happens if we answer?" His voice was flat, not curious, but resigned. 3 days later he was gone, vanished, no note, no trace, his gear left in place. The logbook listed him as absent without leave. They called him a deserter. I knew better. The Ridge had taken his roll call seriously. Now it's just me. I hear it most nights, faint at first, then rising. The hum, the boots, the voices, always the same words. Unit return complete. But the cadence stumbles. It halts on my name. Every time. Like the list is waiting, like the muster isn't finished. I don't know why I was left behind. Maybe because I have to carry the story. Maybe because the Ridge needs someone to remember. Or maybe it's just not done with me yet. Sometimes I think about going back, driving those roads again, finding the clearing, pressing my hand against the soil where it still beats warm. Maybe the bunker is still there. Maybe the reels still spin. Maybe Miller and the others are still marching in endless circles inside the fog, waiting for me to fall in step. Other times I wonder if it's already too late, if every mile I drive is already part of their road, stretching from that pit into every place I go. I told myself I'd never speak of this, that silence would bury it like the Army did. But silence is what the Ridge feeds on. So I'm telling it now, not for proof, not for justice, for warning. If you ever find yourself on an Appalachian back road, fog thick as soup, engines choking, radios dead, and you hear boots marching in rhythm beside you, don't call out, don't fall behind. And if you hear the roll call and it pauses on a name that sounds like yours, run. Run, but know this. Some lists never end. Some deliveries never finish. And once the Ridge writes you down, it won't forget. I still hear them at night. The cadence steady, voices strong, all accounted, except me. So far. I have spent years trying to convince myself that night was just a hallucination born of fear and exhaustion. But the memories are too sharp. The details never fade. I remember the way the reels spun without touch. I remember the hum pressing through my bones. I remember the soldiers marching, eyes empty, boots pounding in perfect rhythm. You don't dream things that precise, you survive them. The Army buried the report, same as it always does when a mission turns into something it can't explain. Families got folded flags and empty caskets. The files say, lost in weather. I signed that lie. Every time I think about Miller, Collins, and the others, I feel like I signed their names to a second death. But the Ridge doesn't let go. I hear it still. Some nights it's faint, just a low vibration when I lie down, like a generator humming beneath the floor. Other nights it's louder, so clear I can count the cadence of boots. It always stops on my name, always waits. I've moved 3 times since then. Different states, different jobs, different uniforms. Doesn't matter. The ridge finds me. The fog shows up on roads that never had it before. Radios flicker with static and half-heard orders from decades past. Once in the desert, I heard Colin's voice in the hiss of the comms, calling units that don't exist anymore. I told myself I'd never go back, but in a way I already have. The ridge is a ledger. Once your name's written down, you don't escape it by crossing state lines. You just carry it with you, like a shadow. Some nights I wonder if I should answer, if I should step into the fog willingly, finish the muster, complete the roll call. Maybe then the hum would stop. Maybe then the faces pressing against the glow would finally be at rest. Or maybe I just join them, another silhouette marching into a pit that never fills. That's the part that haunts me most, the idea that it doesn't end. The ridge has been taking names for longer than we've been alive, longer than the wars we fought. Every battle, every loss, every missing soldier, it all feels connected now, as if the earth itself has been keeping score. And it's still keeping score. I don't tell this story for sympathy. I tell it because maybe one day you'll find yourself in a convoy on some forgotten back road. Maybe the fog will rise thicker than it should. Maybe the radios will die and the trees will seem too close. Maybe you'll hear boots pacing beside you. If that day comes, remember this. Don't answer the roll call. Don't let them write your name, because once the ridge records you, you belong to it. I am the last man left from that convoy. I've been living on borrowed time. Every night I wonder if it will be the one when the cadence stops waiting and pulls me in. I don't know if I'll fight or if I'll finally fall in line, but if you're hearing my words, it means I'm still here, still holding out, still resisting the muster, for now. And if one night you wake in silence, hear the hum through the floorboards and feel the air pressing heavy on your chest, listen close. If you hear the boots, the voices, the count, know that the ridge is still out there, still calling, still collecting. And maybe, just maybe, it's not my name it's waiting for anymore. It could be yours. You're still watching without subscribing? Make sure you don't miss the next story. Subscribe now and share with your friends. Tell us your country, the time you're watching, and any real-life incident like this, then post it in the comments.